A successful European Ukraine poses an existential threat to the Putin regime. This is why Moscow has spent years directing its information resources to discredit Ukraine and Ukrainians in the European media. In this context, elections are a particularly vulnerable period in the information sphere, characterized by an acceleration of the dynamics of news and media content on socially and politically significant topics. One of the key EU countries holding crucial elections in 2025 is the Czech Republic. For Ukraine, Prague's support in military and politico-diplomatic spheres remains critically important amid the ongoing war. At the same time, the main intrigue of the Czech parliamentary elections in October is the possible return to power of Andrej Babiš, who served as the country's prime minister from 2017 to 2021. During the 2023 Czech presidential elections, Babiš portrayed his main opponent, military officer Petr Pavel, as the candidate of war. It is likely that in the upcoming parliamentary campaign this autumn, Babiš's ANO party will once again invoke the issue of support for Ukraine. Such rhetoric can damage the image of a European Ukraine in the Czech information space. In this context, we spoke with Pavel Havlicek, research fellow at the Association for International Affairs in Czech Republic. Pavel, what are the main anti-Ukrainian narratives in the rhetoric of political parties and influential politicians?
It seems that Ukraine is becoming a big topic, especially for some of the political parties. Of course, here the question is about the support to Ukraine, the level of it. Actually, Czechia and this government has been a prime example of how you can actually do things quite well in support of Ukraine in terms of also supplying the ammunition initiative, but also the help for refugees. So these topics then automatically become big narratives, big issues in the society. They are widely discussed. You might recall that Czechia has been the highest number country per capita recipient of Ukraine refugees. So of course this creates a lot of discussions, and these are then turned into political narratives, and they are often instrumentalized by some of the political parties. In this case, what we are seeing is, of course, where the public resources are supposed to go. So this is actually a big narrative that the opposition parties, including both ANO of the former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, but also some of the out of parliament currently far right and far left groupings are using, so that we should first take care of our own people. The slogan "Our people" actually became a major one in terms of the political campaigning. So we should take care of ourselves first. With that, there is a bigger narrative actually, which actually includes Ukraine very prominently, and this is about how much we should actually be afraid of Russia, how much we should invest in security, and how much also along the same lines also support Ukraine. So this then brings into the topic, for example, the ammunition initiative, issue of investment, the state of the armed forces, and these are really big political discussions about how the future Czech army should look like, where to invest resources, how afraid we should be, for example, of Russia, and invest in the deterrence and so on. So these are all topics that actually have Ukraine at its core. And this is where the government also sees its strongest value and its strongest position when it comes to foreign security policy, and they try to proactively bring these topics to the fore. And this is quite interesting, and oftentimes it actually puts the opposition under a lot of pressure, especially because when it comes to the activities and positions of the U.S. administration of Donald Trump, which actually increases this level of turbulency, insecurity, and of course unpredictability of the international affairs. So this is where Ukraine stands in the center of many of the campaign points. They concern both the domestic agenda and how welfare, for example, how public wealth is distributed, but also how the country is positioning itself in the international arena. Last point, big discussion as it seems to be, is of course including the Czech participation in the so-called coalition of the willing. So that if we should, for example, send the Czech soldiers to Ukraine to protect the territory, or if we should do something else with this.
One of the possible ways to settle the Russian-Ukrainian war involves deploying European contingents to ensure security. If Czech military personnel will be deployed on Ukrainian territory after the signing of a peace agreement, what impact would this development have on support for Ukraine?
Most likely negatively, actually. So it might be quite a polarizing issue. How much Czechia should be involved in the conflict? How much we should actually, for example, send our troops to protect the ceasefire or the corresponding peace agreement later. This is actually a widely discussed topic, and that is also why the government has not committed, strictly speaking, that it will send the soldiers. Unlike, for example, France or the UK or some other countries, Czech government has been rather lukewarm, looking for ways how to interact, for example, when providing logistic support and so on. But it has been quite hesitant when it comes to sending soldiers. Also because what you ask is so right that the military type of support and providing lethal types of equipment to Ukraine armed forces, that has been always very much questioned and controversial move. If you compare, for example, with providing humanitarian aid, very, very much different situation in that regard. And this is something that we really see as something that has been questioned in the public and in the eyes of the, so to say, common citizen or ordinary people. If there's a notion like that, this is actually something that has received a lot of criticism. So the government is also carefully balancing accordingly. Based on this, and this might be actually something that uh, gives reason for the opposition to also pick up the topic and criticize the government.
How the attitude toward Ukrainians living in the Czech Republic changed since 2022?
For bringing this up, I think it's very important. As I mentioned, this is a big issue here in the Czech Republic. And also this was a way how many Czechs actually got to know Ukraine and Ukrainians much better. More in the past, most of the time, we got to know about Ukraine since we are not a directly neighboring country to Ukraine, but have a lot of historic connections with each other through the labor migration. Many people working in the Czech Republic, up to 200,000 already before the start of the small-scale invasion. So many people got to know about Ukraine and Ukrainians through the labor migration, which of course is a specific type of encounter actually. And this actually after 2022, this was actually how people got to know about Ukraine, its regional differences, also language differences and things like that, actually firsthand. So this actually motivated people to get to know better and also open their hearts and minds, really, because at the beginning it was really the people. It wasn't the state, but it was the people that helped to cover up the situation when hundreds of thousands of people started coming. So now, how it stands, also thanks to the later involvement and inclusion of the state and its public resources into this debate, there is a stable majority of people supporting Ukraine refugees, especially if you ask and frame the question if people are willing to integrate, pick up the language, and look for stable job. So with that into account, there is more than 60%, around between 60 to 70% that actually accept and support the continuation of Ukrainian refugees staying in this country of Czech Republic. So this is something very specific, and I think the state has invested a lot in this, but also the public attitudes towards Ukraine and Ukrainians changed a lot and improved a lot, and now remain stable when it comes to integrating people in our societies, because everybody, and this has been part of the narrative also cultivated by the government, has been saying, look, we actually benefit a lot. So these people come, they increase our society, they enrich us, but also they of course pay taxes and they contribute to the society a lot. They don't cause any problems, and we can count on them. They look like us. That's a major difference when it comes to perception of people coming or refugees coming, for example, from the Middle East or North Africa. Very different situation. So in the case of Ukraine, people got to know already through the labor migration that these are people like us. So this is actually something that also, historically speaking, opened the ground and opened the minds of people. And now there is a clear majority, a stable majority for allowing and supporting people staying. But, and this is something that has been mentioned and resurface from time to time, there are narratives, especially from the far right part of this political spectrum, that says, based on the example of Syria and the recent stabilization of the local situation there, is that whenever we have a ceasefire, potentially also peace treaty in Ukraine, there is a stability inside of the country, also people should leave. So that is actually something that has been mentioned by the far right forces, trying to politicize the question of migration and migration-related narratives. But of course, this is something that not only the government, but also, for example, Czech businesses very strongly push against, because now I would dare to say that we are even dependent on Ukrainian labor force and also refugees as a stable income and involvement in on the labor market.
How do you estimate the possible impact of disinformation on the Czech elections? Are the authorities preparing to counter this threat in order to prevent the scenario we observed during the first round of the presidential elections in Romania in November 2024?
Thank you so much for bringing this up, actually, because this is a really important point, and has been widely discussed and resonated a lot in terms of how things can or cannot repeat in the Czech Republic. There were parliamentary seminars organized, there's a wide public debate, a big topic for the journalists, especially regarding the so-called cancel culture, that you have a candidate that you don't like and you actually put him away, even if on a quite a strong grounds, and there was this sort of intelligence sharing and revelation that Russia has been involved and so on. So this is something that has partially scared the Czech political scene, but also, of course, promoted a lot of discussions inside the society. So what has happened since then was that there was actually a quite a strong assurance that these kind of attitudes and positions, for example, of the Constitutional Court, which played this incremental and really important role in the Romanian context, that is not possible. The Constitutional Court cannot just cancel candidates like this. There's a whole procedure that works otherwise. Yes, you can repeat an annual elections if, for example, there is wrongdoing or bad counting. That has happened in the past also by the court ruling, but it is not really to target individual candidates or parties, because of course on the axis in between the ruling parties and the opposition, that has been the major point. Okay, are you going to cancel us, or are you going to allow us participate in the elections? So this has been one of the major source of competition in between the governing ruling coalition and the opposition leaders at the side. But the issue, as you hinted on, is deeper, and this concerns the electoral interference and issues that really we should prioritize in terms of striving for transparency and integrity of the electoral system and the whole process. So, and this is something that still Czechia has not exhausted all possibilities. There is the law on so-called law on digital economy, which is a transposition of the European Digital Service Act, which actually should give additional powers to the national regulators to actually much more carefully observe the social scene, social media environment, the online space, but proactively act in cases such as what we have seen in Romania, where it has been platforms like TikTok or Facebook, actually, which have been abused by some of the actors, also not while not following their own rules, but of course also that being abused by third-party actors, including Russian Federation above all. So that has been actually something that we have in the society prioritize in terms of implementation and the need to adopt this. There is a high level of support by the ruling parties towards this, but still there's a lot of opposition and the narrative that basically the SA and this kind of digital regulation promotes limits on the freedom of speech and also censorship as such. So that is actually part of the bigger debate. It's not only Romania, but it's also how the political scene is being regulated and what is being allowed and not in the public domain. So that is actually part of the bigger debate, and this is ongoing and quite a contentious debate, I have to say, in between the ruling government and the opposition parties. But as such, the case of Romania cannot just simply, as it stands and constitutional as it stands, repeat in the Czech Republic.
What are the reasons behind the rise of ANO party popularity?
There are a couple of points, because it's a very complex situation, and I will just try to simplify maybe one reasoning why Anna is so high in the polls actually. But just starting by a small remark that actually the recent wave of polling, which we now do at least some of the sociological agencies on a weekly basis, shows that there has been some decrease recently. Seemingly, the ANO movement actually might have reached the peak with around 35%, and now we see a small drop to 33, 32. So we'll see how the polls are, and we are still a couple of months, even up to 7 months actually, prior to elections, and many things can happen. So this is not a given thing that they will finally, not maybe win. They will most likely win, but it's not given that they will stay at so high up in the ranks. But just to go back to your question, actually, what is so important is actually to know that, of course, if you are going through these constant wave of crisis, I dare to say, and we had COVID in the past. Now we have the Russian war against Ukraine, high level of turbulence at the international scene, but also very strong domestic impacts when it comes to high inflation, and energy prices and things like that. So there is always a beneficiary position of the opposition. If you are not in government, you are actually just sort of laying back and sitting back and relaxing, and basically your polls very naturally actually rise. So they don't have to do much, when just seeing the government actually struggling sometimes, to cope with the constant waves of crisis, so that is first. So their position is by default actually beneficial for them, not being in government. But there is more to that. There have been also mistakes on the side of the ruling party. You might recall also a small government crisis in autumn last year after the regional elections, when the Pirate Party actually left the coalition, and which are now composed of four parties. It's still a lot. When making compromises in between four different political groupings, it's very painful and it's not easy. And due to that, many reforms and many important agendas were not implemented because the parties could not agree. So that is also yet another reason. So yet another reason why Babiš is benefiting. And finally, of course, and this is also a credit to give to them, and you credit where it's needed. They do have a very good marketing team. They do have a very skillful team and resources. Andrej Babiš is not a poor man. He's one of the wealthiest businessmen. Some would even say oligarch, with all these overlaps in media sphere, in political domain nowadays, that you know very well from Ukraine. So that is something that is also goes on top. They don't have limited resources, and sometimes the fight with this and the sophisticated marketing and pollings that they can do on the go, focus groups, on which they can test all the narratives. The other parties, they don't have this, So there is an unequal competition to some degree, especially with the smaller political groupings. And Andrej Babiš, of course, benefits from these resources and from the skills and people that he can hire to help him with the campaign. And it is a very professional campaign. They are doing very well. What they are saying, we might not always like, but of course, it is sometimes it's very oftentimes very carefully crafted and very sophisticated when it comes to the marketing behind it.
What advice would you give to Ukraine regarding communication with the Czech civil society and media in order to minimize the impact and spread of anti-Ukrainian narratives?
What is so important is actually that Ukrainian and Ukrainians are active in the Czech Republic as such, but at different levels. Not always it is the most productive to go through the high level political grounds, and as you ask yourself, there might be some change, sometimes more in the form than in the content, but there might be a different team after the parliamentary elections. It might be, as we discussed, Andrej Babiš will be most likely and we will see the final composition, which also gives some challenges because Andrej Babiš has been a person in the past that was very pro-Ukrainian. I dare to say he was the one that brought actually the biggest business delegation back in at the end of 2019 to Kiev. He prouded himself when they also did a lot of change on the Czech policy towards Russia. So even if you hear oftentimes that he's a pro-Russian politician, his Kremlin is very close to him, I wouldn't necessarily say. He is a very pragmatic man, and if Ukraine and the Ukrainians offer enough, he's very capable of changing the tone and sometimes also be much more interested than some in the past. So we have to be pragmatic sometimes, and as you rightly asked yourself, it is often about finding the right time, right resources, right venues, maybe to talk. Just over the weekend, actually, when I was very proud of that. There was a new agreement signed on uplifting the Czech-Ukraine partnership into a strategical level partnership, which opened new opportunities. The Czech president Pavel actually just visited Odessa and the southern part of Ukraine, but then he traveled to Kiev and met with President Volodymyr Zelensky, and they signed agreement. Which has now open a number of venues. It is, of course, to keep the connections very close and to frame the relations whoever comes after the election. So that definitely is an investment in the sustainability of bilateral partnership. But then the agreement actually itself, it adds and emphasizes a number of areas, including, for example, the Czech-Ukrainian discussion forum that has been a prominent platform for Czech and Ukrainian civil societies to discuss, to meet, to dedicate attention, and also bring proactive topics. Historically speaking, there was a lot of attention on the historical memory issues, but also think tank security, exchange of best practice, in a number of areas. So there's a lot actually that this venue and also the whole framework of a strategic partnership between Czechia and Ukraine can actually bring. There are ideas to develop also much more closely the parliamentary cooperation and parliamentary level of engagement. There has been a lot of close relations between the chairman of Verkhovna Rada and also the chairwoman of the Czech Chamber of Deputies. But it shouldn't just end there. There are specific groups that are dedicated to this. There should be much more dialogue, exchange of perspectives, and there is also something that the civil society should be actively, bringing in when it comes to bridging the Czech and Ukraine realities. For example, when it comes to, and this is something that will be of our interest in our think tank. And this is actually how to benefit from Ukraine experience, sometimes sad and tragic experience, but a very rich one and enriching out to ourselves. And this is how to manage in the crisis times. These are still ongoing, as we discussed before our recording, but there is an enormous vast of knowledge that actually should benefit us when it comes to, for example, cooperation between the state and civil society, when it comes to the civil society support to the armed forces, and things like that. And we are really struggling for many, many years in the Czech Republic to create this more efficient system of cooperation inside between the state and civil society, but also with the outside actors. And this might be a very good opportunity, and we should really make sure that we benefit, we learn from each other. We can also give some feedback, but definitely we are here to learn from Ukraine, because what has happened to Ukraine is, of course, something tragic, but also something that can help us to come closer together, to integrate Ukraine in the Western community. You spoke about enlargement. This is something that we should definitely speak more about, to introduce the Ukraine experience and see how much progress has been achieved, so that we actually include the Czech support for this, which is, I would say, a big one, but there are still spaces for improvement. Mutual learning, bringing together Ukrainians learning from Czechia, and when it comes to enlargement, for example, how we did over the past decades, to integrate and transfer from command economy into a market driven one, and also how to transform from an authoritarian state into a liberal democratic one, how to build institutions and things like that. But indeed, there is a lot that we should learn from Ukraine as well, as I mentioned before. So this is definitely the angle where we will be investing in AMO and with our partners in civil society. But you also spoke about media, and I can see that there's been a lot of cooperation, a lot of projects, a lot of exchange, and we have a lot of Ukrainian journalists now in Czechia. A lot of people are coming to Czechia, and there are a lot of Czech journalists traveling to Ukraine, and we have a substantial presence covering the situation on the ground, every day around the front line, talking to people. And this is really what we need, to exchange, to learn, but also to get to know each other better on the way, because things develop very quickly and we need to really follow the developments. So thanks for so much for having me. And these are the ideas and thoughts that came to mind.
The interview was compiled with the support of the European Union and the International Renaissance Foundation within the framework European Renaissance of Ukraine project. Its content is the exclusive responsibility of the authors and does not necessarily reflect the views of the European Union and the International Renaissance Foundation.